In a roadside diner along Route 66, a disabled Marine veteran was about to face her worst nightmare. What started as a quiet dinner took a shocking turn when she came face to face with a motorcycle gang intent on humiliation. Lara Poole wasn't your typical small-town mechanic. For 8 years, she had served as a Marine Corps vehicle specialist in Afghanistan, known for keeping convoys running under fire. When the road wolves mocked her prosthetic leg, she had no idea a retired Army colonel was watching. His unexpected intervention would transform public cruelty into a moment of recognition. That changed everything, proving that real heroism comes in many forms. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The socket wrench slipped from Lara Poole's grease-stained fingers as the old Ford's engine backfired, the sharp crack echoing through Rodriguez's auto repair like gunfire. For a moment, she wasn't in the garage anymore. She was back in the Humvee, the taste of dust and diesel thick in her throat, watching the road ahead shimmer in the Afghan heat. Her prosthetic leg pressed against the concrete floor as she steadied herself against the workbench, waiting for her heartbeat to slow. The phantom pain in her missing limb flared, a cruel reminder that some wounds never truly healed. 3 years since the IED had torn through their convoy, and still her body remembered what her mind tried to forget. "Poole, you all right back there?" Frank Rodriguez's voice cut through the memory like a lifeline. "Just fine," she called back, forcing her voice steady. She picked up the wrench and returned to the transmission rebuild, her movements precise despite the tremor in her hands. The work grounded her metal and oil problems with solutions, engines that could be fixed if you knew where to look. Frank appeared at her shoulder, studying the complex arrangement of parts she'd laid out with mechanical precision. At 48, the garage owner moved with the deliberate economy of someone who'd learned to read people, as well as engines, during his Navy years. His weathered hands bore the same constellation of scars that marked every mechanic worth their salt. "That's beautiful work," he said, nodding at the transmission. "Mrs. Henderson's gonna think she's driving a brand new truck when you're done with this." Lara wiped her hands on a shop rag, avoiding his eyes. Compliments still felt foreign, like clothes that didn't quite fit. "It's just doing the job right." "No, it's more than that." Frank's voice carried the quiet authority of someone used to being heard. "You see things other mechanics miss. The way you diagnosed that differential noise last week took me 30 years to develop that kind of ear." The praise should have warmed her. Instead, it only reminded her of everything she'd lost. There had been a time when she'd torn down engines for fun, when her hands moved across machinery like a musician's across piano keys. Now every repair felt like proving herself all over again, like the prosthetic somehow made her less capable in the eyes of everyone watching. The bell above the front door chimed, and Billy Murphy's voice drifted back from the waiting area. "Hey, Mr. Rodriguez, my grandmother wanted me to ask if Miss Poole could take a look at the diner's delivery van tomorrow. It's making that grinding noise again." Frank glanced at Lara, who nodded curtly. Billy had been trying to start conversations with her for months, his teenage awkwardness made worse by what seemed like genuine hero worship. She could see it in the way he looked at her, like she was something special instead of someone broken. "Tell Elena we'll send Lara over first thing," Frank called back. "Yes, sir." And Billy's voice dropped, but not enough to keep his words from carrying. "Tell her my grandmother says there's been talk about the road wolves coming through town again. Maybe she should be careful walking home from the diner late." Lara's hands still on the transmission housing. She'd heard the rumors, a motorcycle club that moved through small towns like a storm, leaving trouble in their wake. The kind of men who saw anyone different as a target. Frank's expression darkened. "Boys, got a point. Those road wolves have been causing problems up and down Route 66. Deputy Valdez stopped by yesterday. Said they hit a veteran-owned business over in Amarillo last week. I can take care of myself." Lara said automatically, the words worn smooth from repetition. "I know you can." Frank's tone was matter of fact. "Doesn't mean you should have to." After Billy left, Lara finished cleaning up her workspace with the methodical precision that had kept her alive. Overseas, every tool in its place, every surface wiped clean. Order imposed on chaos, the way she'd learned to impose control on the parts of her life that still felt manageable. The parking lot was empty when she finally locked up, her truck the only vehicle under the yellow sodium lights. The prosthetic chafed against her leg as she climbed into the driver's seat, a constant reminder of the weight she carried, not just the artificial limb, but everything it represented, the life before, the moment that divided her existence into then and now. The three Marines who'd made it home because she'd stayed behind to pull them from the wreckage. Murphy's Diner sat at the edge of town like a beacon, its neon sign painting the empty highway in shades of blue and red. Elena Murphy had converted the old Route 66 truck stop into something that felt like community. Red vinyl booths worn smooth by countless conversations, coffee that was always fresh, and the kind of food that reminded travelers of home. Lara had been coming here for 8 months, ever since Frank hired her and she'd rented the small apartment above the hardware store. She always took the corner booth, back to the wall, where she could watch the room and the parking lot through the wide windows, old habits from a life where situational awareness meant survival. Evening, honey, Elena called from behind the counter, her voice carrying the warmth of someone who'd been feeding people for 30 years. She was built like someone who'd weathered every storm life could throw at her and come through stronger. Her graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her movements efficient and sure. "Ma'am," Lara replied, sliding into her usual seat. Elena brought coffee without being asked. Black. The way Lara always took it, and set down a menu that Lara had memorized, but still pretended to read. The ritual gave them both something to do with the awkwardness that seemed to follow her everywhere. "Billy says the delivery van's acting up again," Elena said, refilling Lara's cup. "I swear that thing's held together with prayers and duct tape. Frank said I'd take a look tomorrow morning." "I appreciate that." "And Lara," Elena's voice softened, "Billy's been wanting to talk to you about enlisting. His parents died when he was 14, and he's got this idea that military service is some kind of answer to everything. Maybe you could." "I'm not good with advice," Lara cut her off gently. The last thing she wanted was to influence some kid's decision about military service. She'd seen too much, lost too much, to paint it in patriotic colors for someone who still thought war was about heroes and glory. Elena nodded, understanding passing between them like a shared language. The diner owner had buried her own husband after Vietnam, and she recognized the weight of memories that couldn't be spoken aloud. Lara ordered her usual meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, comfort food that reminded her of mess halls and better times. She ate slowly, watching the few other customers, a trucker finishing pie at the counter, an elderly couple sharing dessert, a salesman in a wrinkled suit reading the local paper. The normalcy of it should have been soothing. Instead, it made her feel like an outsider looking in on a life she'd forgotten how to live. These people belonged here, were part of something larger than themselves. She was just passing through, marking time until she figured out what came next. Through the window, she watched a deputy's cruiser make its slow patrol down Main Street. Rosa Valdez. Frank had mentioned former National Guard, someone who understood the difference between service and politics. The sight of the patrol car should have been reassuring, but it only reminded Lara of the vulnerability she carried like a target on her back. The diner's warmth felt suffocating suddenly, the overhead lights too bright, the conversations too loud. She was finishing her coffee when the rumble reached her, distant at first, then growing stronger. Motorcycle engines, running heavy and loud, the kind of sound that announced trouble long before it arrived. Elena's hand stilled on the coffee pot, and the trucker at the counter turned toward the window. Through the glass, Lara could see headlights approaching from the east, 5 or 6 bikes moving in formation down the empty highway. The road wolves had come to town. The motorcycles' rumble grew louder as they approached Murphy's Diner, their headlights cutting through the Texas night like predatory eyes. Lara's hand instinctively moved to her coffee cup, fingers wrapping around the ceramic warmth as her body shifted into the hyper-alert state that had kept her alive in Afghanistan. Every muscle coiled, every sense sharpened, reading the environment for threats and escape routes. Elena Murphy set down the coffee pot with deliberate calm, but Lara caught the subtle tension in her shoulders. The way her eyes tracked toward the phone behind the counter. The trucker at the bar pushed his plate away, suddenly interested in settling his check. The elderly couple in the far booth continued their quiet conversation, but their voices carried a forced lightness that suggested they, too, had noticed the approaching storm. A dusty pickup truck pulled into the parking lot just ahead of the motorcycles, and Lara watched as a man emerged from the driver's seat with movements that immediately marked him as military, mid-60s, silver-haired, with the kind of bearing that 35 years of service had carved into his bones. He carried himself like someone accustomed to command, but there was something else, a weariness that spoke of recent loss, of carrying burdens that couldn't be shared. Colonel James Mac Mackenzie pushed through the diner's front door, his weathered hands clutching a manila envelope that looked worn from handling. Lara caught a glimpse of photographs spilling from the edges, formal portraits, the kind taken for military records or family montels, Gold Star families. She realized the envelope held the weight of final visits, of delivering a nation's gratitude to parents who would trade every medal for one more conversation with their children. Mac chose a corner booth with his own view of the parking lot, his movements economical and purposeful. When Elena approached with a menu, he ordered coffee and pie with the courteous efficiency of someone who'd eaten in 1,000 diners across a dozen deployments. But his eyes never stopped moving, cataloging exits and assessing the other patrons with the professional interest of someone who'd learned that relaxation was a luxury reserved for the truly safe. Lara found herself studying him, recognizing something familiar in his careful positioning, the way he kept his back to the wall and his hands free. Military bearing was something you developed over years of service, but the hypervigilance was different, that came from places where the wrong choice meant people died. She saw in his weathered features the same ghosts that haunted her own reflection. Outside, the motorcycles roared into the parking lot with an explosion of sound and fury that made the diner's windows vibrate. 5 bikes, all black chrome and aggressive lines, ridden by men whose leather vests bore the distinctive patches of the road wolves. They parked in a deliberate line, claiming the space like territory marked by predators. The lead rider dismounted first, a tall, heavily muscled man whose patch identified him as Razor. Tommy Kowalski moved with the aggressive swagger of someone who'd learned to use intimidation as his primary tool, his eyes scanning the diner's interior through the wide windows, like a hunter selecting prey. Even from inside, Lara could see the insecurity that drove his posturing, the desperate need to prove himself that marked men who'd never tested themselves against anything real. Behind him came for others, including a man whose patch read Hammer, Marcus Johnson, though Lara didn't know his name yet. Where the others moved with theatrical menace, Marcus carried himself with the controlled precision of actual military training. Desert Storm veteran, she guessed from his age and bearing, someone who'd learned that real violence was never performed for an audience. Elena moved behind the counter with practiced efficiency, but Lara caught the subtle signals, the way she positioned herself near the phone, how her hand briefly touched the baseball bat she kept behind the register. 30 years of running a truck stop had taught her to read trouble before it walked through her door. Maybe they'll just get gas and move on, the elderly woman whispered to her husband, but her voice carried no conviction. The trucker stood up, throwing money on the counter. Think I'll head back to my rig, he muttered to Elena. Early day tomorrow. Nobody believed his excuse, but Elena nodded and wished him safe travels. Through the window, they watched him hurry to his 18-wheeler, the big diesel engine turning over with a rumble that momentarily drowned out the motorcycles. Mac's attention sharpened as the road wolves approached the diner entrance. His hands moved slightly on the table, positioning themselves for quick movement while maintaining the appearance of casual relaxation. Lara recognized the technique, staying ready without advertising your readiness, the kind of preparation that became second nature after enough deployments. The photographs from his envelope had scattered slightly across the table, and Lara caught glimpses of young faces in military dress uniforms, sons and daughters who would never come home. whose families he was visiting as part of some personal mission that had brought him to this small Texas town. The weight of that responsibility showed in the lines around his eyes, the careful way he handled each photograph like a sacred trust. Tommy Kowalski's laughter carried through the glass as he pointed toward the diner, saying something that made his companions grin with ugly anticipation. Marcus Johnson didn't smile, his expression growing increasingly uncomfortable as his leader's voice rose with crude enthusiasm. Inside the diner, time seemed suspended. Elena continued her routine, wiping down tables, refilling coffee cups, maintaining the illusion of normalcy even as tension coiled through the room like a live wire. The elderly couple finished their dessert with forced conversation, while Mac methodically returned his photographs to their envelope with the reverent care of a man handling the memory of the dead. Lara's prosthetic leg ached where it met her residual limb, a phantom pain that always intensified when stress triggered her body's fight-or-flight response. She flexed her fingers round the coffee cup, feeling the familiar weight of hypervigilance settling over her like armor she'd never quite learned to remove. Through the window, she watched Tommy's eyes sweep the diner's interior and stop on her. His grin widened, predatory and cruel, as he took in her obvious disability and the way she sat alone. She'd seen that look before, the expression of someone who'd found what he thought was easy prey. The road wolves pushed through the diner's front door with the aggressive confidence of men who'd learned that volume and posture could substitute for actual strength. The bell above the entrance chimed once, then fell silent, as if the building itself held its breath. Tommy Kowalski's eyes locked onto Lara across the room, and his smile carried the promise of cruelty to come. Tommy Kowalski's boots hit the diner's checkered linoleum with deliberate weight, each step announcing his presence like a predator marking territory. The road wolves spread out behind him in practiced formation, not the careful positioning of trained soldiers, but the theatrical intimidation of men who'd learned their tactics from movies and bar fights. Well, Tommy's voice carried across the suddenly silent diner, his eyes fixed on Lara with the hungry focus of someone who'd found entertainment for the evening. Look what we got here, boys, a real-life war hero. Lara's grip tightened on her coffee cup, the ceramic warm against fingers that had gone cold despite the diner's heat. She could feel every eye in the room turning toward her, the elderly couple trying not to stare. Elena frozen behind the counter with a disrag in her hands. Mac watching from his corner booth with the calculating stillness of a man assessing a developing situation. Tommy, maybe we should just... Marcus Johnson's voice carried a warning, but his leader cut him off with a dismissive wave. Nah, hammer. Can't be rude to our local celebrity. Tommy approached Lara's table with exaggerated courtesy, his leather vest creaking with each movement. Up close, she could see the patches he wore like trophies, skulls and flames. Aggressive imagery meant to intimidate civilians who'd never seen real violence. Mind if we join you, ma'am? Hate to see a lady dining alone. I prefer it that way, Lara replied evenly, her voice carrying the controlled calm she'd learned in situations where the wrong tone could escalate everything beyond control. Tommy slid into the booth across from her without invitation, his bulk taking up space. With deliberate aggression, two of his companions flanked the table while Marcus remained standing, his discomfort obvious to anyone who knew how to read body language. The fifth road wolf positioned himself near the door blocking the exit. Lara noted automatically. Now, that's not very friendly, Tommy said, his smile never reaching his eyes, especially for someone who's supposed to be all about serving her country and community. His gaze dropped deliberately to where her prosthetic leg disappeared beneath the table. Though I guess your serving days are over, huh? The words hit like physical blows, each one designed to find the exact spot where her armor was thinnest. Lara felt the familiar surge of rage that had once gotten her in trouble. During her early days at the VA hospital, the fury at being seen as broken diminished, less than what she'd been before. Must be tough, Tommy continued, his voice taking on mock sympathy. Going from tough Marine to, well, this, half the woman you used to be, you might say. A sharp intake of breath from Elena's direction was the only sound in the diner. The elderly woman's hand had moved to cover her mouth in horror, while her husband stared at his plate as if he could disappear into the pattern. Mac's posture had shifted almost imperceptibly, his hands moving to rest flat on the table in preparation for movement. "I bet you were real tough over there," one of Tommy's companions chimed in, emboldened by his leader's cruelty, "before you got yourself blown up playing soldier." The words triggered something deeper than anger, a flashback that came without warning, pulling Lara back to that moment when the world exploded around her. The taste of dust and blood, the weight of Rodriguez pinning her down as shrapnel flew overhead, the choice between her own safety and the 3 Marines trapped in the burning vehicle. "Thing is," Tommy leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conversational tone that somehow made his words more vicious, "real heroes don't come home broken. Real heroes either come home whole or don't come home at all." The silence that followed was absolute, as if every person in the diner had stopped breathing. Elena's face had gone white with outrage, her knuckles showing where she gripped the counter. Marcus Johnson looked like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world, his jaw clenched tight with obvious discomfort. "You know what I think?" Tommy's voice rose again, performing now for his audience. "I think you're just another welfare case, looking for sympathy, playing up the poor little cripple veteran angle to get special treatment." Lara's training warred with her emotions, the part of her that wanted to show this ignorant bully exactly what a broken Marine could do, and the part that recognized this as exactly the kind of situation her therapist had warned her about. Escalation would only prove his point, make her the aggressive veteran stereotype that people already whispered about. "That's enough." Mac's voice cut through the tension like a blade, quiet but carrying absolute authority. He hadn't moved from his booth, but something in his tone made every head in the diner turn toward him. Tommy twisted to look at the older man, his expression shifting from cruel amusement to irritation at the interruption. "This doesn't concern you, Pops. Just having a friendly conversation with our local hero here." "No," Mac said, his voice still conversational but with steel underneath. "You're not." The colonel's weathered hands remained flat on the table, but Lara could see the coiled tension in his shoulders, the way his breathing had changed to the controlled rhythm of someone preparing for action. He was reading the room with the expertise of decades in uniform, calculating distances and angles with professional precision. "You want to make this your business, old man." Tommy's bravado kicked into higher gear, threatened by the quiet confidence radiating from the corner booth. "Maybe you need to learn some manners about when to keep your mouth shut." Mac's eyes moved from Tommy to Lara, and in that moment she saw something that made her breath catch. Recognition, not just the casual acknowledgement of one veteran spotting another, but something deeper. He was seeing through her civilian clothes and careful composure to the warrior underneath, the same way she'd recognized his bearing and discipline. "Stand down, son," Mac said quietly, and the words carried the weight of someone who'd given orders in places where lives hung in the balance. "Before you embarrass yourself further." Tommy's face flushed red with humiliation and rage, his carefully constructed dominance challenged by someone who radiated actual authority, instead of theatrical posturing. Round him, his companions shifted nervously, suddenly aware that the dynamic in the room had changed. "You have no idea who you're talking to," Tommy snarled, starting to rise from the booth. Mac's smile was thin and cold as winter steel. "Actually, I do." Mac rose from his corner booth with the measured grace of someone who'd commanded respect in rooms far more dangerous than a small-town diner. His weathered hands moved to the manila envelope on his table, and as he approached Lara's booth, his eyes shifted to something mounted on the wall behind Elena's counter that had been there for months but suddenly commanded the room's attention. Lara's service medals, displayed in a simple black frame that Elena had insisted on after learning about them through Frank. The purple heart and bronze star caught the diner's fluorescent light, their ribbons still vibrant despite everything they represented. Lara had finally agreed to let Elena display them after months of gentle persuasion, though she'd immediately regretted the decision. "Sergeant Lara Poole," Mac said, his voice carrying across the silent diner with the formal precision of someone reading a citation. "3rd Battalion, 7th Marines." Tommy's sneer faltered as Mac's words registered, confusion replacing the cruel confidence that had driven his harassment. The other road wolves shifted nervously, suddenly uncertain about the dynamics they'd walked into. Mac stopped beside Lara's table and executed a crisp military salute, his form perfect despite the civilian clothes and small-town setting. The gesture transformed the moment completely. What had been a scene of humiliation, becoming something else entirely, something that elevated rather than diminished. Bronze Star with Valor device, Mac continued, his voice now addressing the entire diner. Awarded for gallantry in action while serving as a vehicle mechanic in Helmand Province, Afghanistan, when her convoy was hit by an improvised explosive device. Sergeant Poole exposed herself to enemy fire to extract 3 wounded Marines from a burning vehicle. Elena's hand had moved to cover her heart, tears gathering in her eyes as she finally understood the full scope of what those medals represented. The elderly couple sat transfixed, their earlier fear replaced by something approaching awe. Even Tommy's companions were staring now, the theatrical menace draining from their postures. Purple Heart, Mac's voice gained strength, as if drawing power from the telling. Awarded for wounds received in action against an enemy of the United States, Sergeant Poole sustained severe injuries, including traumatic amputation of her left leg below the knee, while completing the rescue of her fellow Marines. Lara felt something breaking inside her chest, not the brittle fracture of humiliation, but the deeper crack of walls she'd built to protect herself from exactly this kind of attention. Mac's words were stripping away the careful anonymity she'd constructed, exposing her not as the broken veteran she'd convinced herself she'd become, but as the warrior she'd been. The citation reads, Mac continued, pulling a folded paper from his pocket with the reverence reserved for sacred texts, that Sergeant Poole's actions directly resulted in saving 3 lives, and that her courage under fire exemplified the highest traditions of the Marine Corps and the United States Naval Service. Tommy Kowalski sat frozen in the booth, his earlier swagger evaporating as the weight of Mac's words settled over the diner. The man he'd been tormenting wasn't just another veteran, she was someone who'd proven her courage in the most fundamental way possible, trading her body for the lives of others. Show some respect. Mac's voice dropped to a level that carried more menace than Tommy's earlier bluster ever could. The colonel's eyes locked onto the motorcycle club leader with the kind of stare that had ended careers and broken stronger men than the insecure bully sitting across from Lara. We didn't, Tommy stammered, his face cycling through confusion, embarrassment, and growing anger as he realized how completely the situation had shifted. Marcus Johnson stepped forward, his earlier discomfort crystallizing into something that looked like shame. Tommy, we should go, now. But Tommy's humiliation was transforming into the kind of desperate rage that made dangerous men unpredictable. I don't care what medals she's got, he snarled, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. Still doesn't change what she is. Now, the words hung in the air like a challenge, and Mac's response was swift and final. He moved with the economical violence of someone who'd learned his craft in places where hesitation meant death, one hand shooting out to grab Tommy's jacket while the other pressed against his throat with just enough pressure to make breathing difficult. What she is, Mac said quietly, his voice carrying the absolute authority of someone who'd led soldiers through hell and brought them home, is a hero who's earned more respect than you'll see in 10 lifetimes. Elena had moved from behind the counter, her earlier fear replaced by fierce protectiveness. You heard the colonel, she said, her voice shaking with emotion. Lara's family here, and family doesn't get treated like that in my place. The elderly man at the far booth had found his voice. Sergeant, it would be an honor to buy your dinner tonight. His wife nodded emphatically, tears streaming down her cheeks as she looked at the medals on the wall with new understanding. Tommy struggled against Mac's grip, his face reddening with more than just restricted airflow. The humiliation of being physically dominated in front of his crew was eating at him, promising future retaliation born of wounded pride and masculine insecurity. Let him go, Colonel, Lara said quietly, speaking for the first time since the confrontation began. Her voice carried a steadiness that surprised even her. as if Mac's recognition had restored something she'd forgotten she possessed. Mac released Tommy with a slight push that sent the younger man stumbling backward. "I suggest you and your friends find somewhere else to be," he said with the kind of calm finality that brooked no argument. Marcus Johnson was already moving toward the door, clearly eager to extract his crew before the situation deteriorated further. "Come on, Tommy, we're done here." But Tommy's eyes promised that this wasn't over, that the humiliation he'd suffered would demand payment. He straightened his leather vest with shaking hands, trying to salvage some dignity from the wreckage of his planned intimidation. "This ain't finished," he muttered, the words directed at both Mac and Lara as he backed toward the exit. "Yes, it is," Mac replied, with absolute certainty. As the road wolves filed out of the diner, their earlier swagger replaced by sullen defeat, the bell above the door chimed with what sounded like finality. Through the windows, they watched the motorcycles roar to life and disappear into the Texas night, leaving behind the echo of promises that would shape everything to come. 3 days had passed since the confrontation at Murphy's Diner, and Mac Mackenzie found himself nursing his 4th cup of coffee at the same corner booth, supposedly waiting for parts for his truck that Frank Rodriguez had assured him would arrive any day now. The mechanical trouble was real enough: a failing alternator and a transmission leak that needed attention, but Mac's reasons for staying had less to do with automotive repairs than with the hollow-eyed veteran who'd been avoiding him since. That night, Lara had returned to her routine with military precision: work, diner, home, repeat. But Mac could see the cracks in her armor, the way her shoulders carried new tension, how her eyes swept the parking lot with increased vigilance. Recognition, he'd learned over 35 years of service, was a double-edged sword. It could heal, but it could also expose wounds that had been carefully bandaged in anonymity. The diner's bell chimed as Lara entered for her usual late dinner, and Mac watched her unconscious threat assessment exits, customers, sight lines. She'd been a good Marine, he could tell, the kind who'd kept her people alive through pure competence and situational awareness. "Mind if I join you?" Mac asked as she settled into her booth, his manila envelope tucked under his arm like a familiar companion. Lara looked up from her menu, and for a moment Mac saw past the careful walls she'd constructed to the young woman who'd thrown herself between death and her fellow Marines. "It's a free country, Colonel." Mac, he corrected, sliding into the seat across from her. "Been retired 3 months now, still getting used to it." Elena approached with coffee for both of them, her motherly concern evident in the way she fussed with the sugar dispenser, and lingered longer than necessary. Since the incident with Tommy Kowalski, she'd appointed herself Lara's unofficial guardian, a role that seemed to involve copious amounts of coffee and strategically timed check-ins. "Frank says your truck should be ready by Friday," Elena mentioned to Mac, though her eyes remained on Lara. "Parts finally came in this morning." Mac nodded his thanks, but made no move to seem eager about leaving. The truth was, he had nowhere pressing to be. His cross-country journey to visit Gold Star families was a self-imposed mission. A way to preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Process his own grief while honoring the memory of his son. But sitting across from Lara, he recognized something he'd been missing: purpose that went beyond mourning. "Those families you've been visiting," Lara said after Elena left, surprising him with her directness. "That's your son's unit." Mac's hands stilled on his coffee cup. "Some of them. David served with the 101st Airborne, deployed to Afghanistan twice before." He let the sentence hang unfinished, the weight of it settling between them like shared understanding. "How long?" 2 years next month." Mac pulled out his phone and showed her a photo: a young man in army dress blues with his father's eyes and a smile that promised he could light up any room. Captain David Mackenzie, 26 years old. "I'd outside Kandahar." Lara studied the photo with the reverence she'd learned to show for the military dead. "He looks like you. His mother always said he got my stubborn streak." Mac's smile was painful and genuine at the same time. Wanted to be a teacher before he enlisted, said he was going to change the world one classroom at a time. What changed his mind? 9/11s. He was only 10, but he never forgot watching those towers fall. Said it was his responsibility to serve. Mac returned the phone to his pocket with careful hands. I was proud of him, still am, but some nights I wonder if I pushed too hard, made service seem like the only honorable path. The admission hung between them, raw and honest in a way that invited reciprocal vulnerability. Lara found herself speaking before she could stop herself. 3 Marines came home because I stayed behind. Rodriguez, Martinez, and Chen, they're all alive, have families now, because I made a choice. Good choice, was it? The question seemed to surprise her as much as it did Mac. Some days I think about what would have happened if I just followed protocol, called for support, waited for backup. Maybe we all would have made it home intact. Mac leaned forward, his voice carrying the weight of experience. Maybe, or maybe you'd all be dead. Second-guessing yourself is a luxury that comes with surviving, Lara. Doesn't make the choice wrong. You sound like my therapist. Dr. Brown's good people. Known her about a week now. Mac's eyes showed surprise at Lara's reaction. You didn't know. I've been attending the veteran support group she runs out of the community center. Part of my own. Processing. The idea of Colonel Mac Mackenzie sitting in a circle talking about feelings seemed impossible to Lara, but the evidence was. Right in front of her, a man who'd commanded thousands learning to be vulnerable enough to heal. How do you do it? She asked. Carry the weight of everyone you've lost. Mac was quiet for a long moment, stirring his coffee with unnecessary concentration. I don't know that you ever stop carrying it, but you can learn to carry it differently. David's gone, and that's a fact that'll never change. But the way he lived, the values he embodied, that continues if I let it. Is that why you're really staying, to make sure I embody the right values? I'm staying because I recognize something in you that I lost when David died. Mac's honesty was unflinching. Purpose. The chance to make a difference in someone's life that matters. Elena appeared at their table with plates of food. Neither had ordered meatloaf for Lara. Chicken fried steak for Mac, both accompanied by the kind of comfort food that spoke to maternal concern rather than culinary preference. On the house, she said firmly when Mac reached for his wallet. Both of you look like you could use some proper feeding. As Elena walked away, Lara found herself almost smiling. She's been trying to fatten me up since I started coming here. Good woman. Reminds me of my mother. Mac cut into his steak with deliberate precision. Used to say that food was just another way of showing people they mattered. They ate in comfortable silence. The kind that developed between people who'd learned that some conversations happened in the spaces between words. Outside, the Texas highway stretched endlessly in both directions, carrying travelers toward destinations unknown. Tommy Kowalski's not done with this, Lara said eventually, voicing what they'd both been thinking. No, he's not. Mac's agreement carried no surprise, only the resignation of someone who'd dealt with enough Tommy Kowalskis to recognize the type. Men like that don't forget being shown up in public, especially not by someone they've decided to see as inferior. Maybe you should get your truck fixed and move on. This isn't your fight. Mac's smile was gentle but implacable. Afraid it became my fight the moment I watched someone disrespect a fellow veteran. Besides, he gestured toward his envelope of photographs. I think David would want me to stay. He always was protective of people who couldn't protect themselves. I can protect myself. I know you can, but maybe it's time you didn't have to do it alone. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning when Lara arrived at Rodriguez Auto Repair to find her toolbox vandalized. Someone had spray-painted a crude representation of a skull across the red metal surface, along with words that made her stomach clench with familiar rage. Frank stood beside the damaged equipment, his face dark with the kind of anger that came from watching someone attack what was his to protect. Happened sometime after midnight, he said without preamble, his voice carrying the controlled fury of a man who'd learned to channel violence constructively. The security camera picked up some movement in the lot, but whoever was behind it knew how to avoid the light. Lara ran her hand across the paint. It was still sticky from the cold night air. The skull matched the insignia of the Road Wolves, exactly Tommy Kowalski's signature, left behind like a warning of worse to come. The words scrawled beneath it were meant to wound, cutting straight to her deepest insecurities. crafted by someone who knew exactly where she was vulnerable: her military service, her disability. "I can get this cleaned up," she said instinctively, already mentally listing the solvents and tools needed to remove the paint. "Without damaging the bodywork, that's not the issue," Frank replied sharply. "This is a clear escalation, Lara. First, they go after your property. You know what comes next." The bell above the front door jingled as Mac stepped inside, having seen the tension from outside. He scanned the scene with calm, tactical precision-taking. In the placement of the graffiti, the method of attack, the intent behind it. "Road wolves?" he asked, though it was more of a statement. "Has to be," Frank answered. "Deputy Valdez is on her way to take a report, but we all know this is just the start." Mac looked over the vandalism like he used to study enemy ambush sites. "They're testing boundaries, seeing what they can get away with before someone fights back. They're about to find out," Frank growled, moving toward the phone. "No." Lara's voice halted him. "No." Frank stared at her, stunned. "They escalated this by targeting you, a disabled vet. This is a response." But Lara had seen how violence builds. She'd watched it grow from threats to full-blown destruction in combat zones and recovery centers alike. She knew when pushing back only fueled the fire. "If we bring in more deputies, make this official, it becomes a turf war," she said quietly but firmly. "Tommy's already bitter from being embarrassed before. If we push him, he'll snap and someone innocent will pay the price." Mac gave a reluctant nod. He recognized the battlefield logic, even if it went against every instinct to protect. "So what do you propose?" "I clean it up and keep working. Let him think he's getting to me." "No way." Frank snapped. "You're not giving him the win." "I'm not giving him anything," Lara cut in, voice steely. "I'm making a strategic choice based on the situation and the opponent." At that moment, Deputy Rosa Valdez arrived. Her patrol car pulled in with calm authority. She got out smoothly, moving like someone well-versed in controlling tense scenes. "Morning." She greeted them, voice even. "Frank said you had some vandalism." She took photos, asked concise questions, and logged everything with practiced efficiency, clearly drawing on a mix of military and law enforcement training. "Technically, this is vandalism," Rosa explained, "but it's obviously meant to intimidate and provoke. I'll request extra patrols, but I can't be everywhere." "Can we press charges?" Mac asked. "We need hard evidence, camera footage, witnesses. Right now, it's all circumstantial. The road wolves are careful not to leave fingerprints." As Rosa wrapped up, Mrs. Henderson pulled into the lot for her scheduled pickup, but instead of her usual friendly smile, her face held unease. "I'm sorry, Frank," she said, avoiding Lara's eyes. "I heard there's been trouble. Maybe I'll wait to bring my truck in." The words struck harder than any graffiti. Lara watched as trust built over decades began to crumble, all because of her. "Mary," Frank said, "equal parts hurt and firm. You've trusted us since 1995. You think I'll let some biker gang decide who I hire or serve?" "It's not that," she said hesitantly. "It's just maybe until things blow over. The trouble doesn't disappear just because good people back away," Mac added. "It just finds someone else to target." But Mrs. Henderson was already retreating to her truck, fear winning out over loyalty. "I'm sorry," she said. Again before driving off, Frank's face darkened with quiet fury. 30 years, he muttered, and she'd throw it all away over a coward with a spray can. Lara felt the weight of it settling on her, guilt and isolation wrapping around her like a second skin. This was why she came to the town in the first place, to avoid being a burden. "Maybe I should," she started. "Don't," Mac interrupted sharply. "Don't even think about blaming yourself for their fear. But if I wasn't here, if you weren't here, Tommy Kowalski would just find another target. People like him don't stop. They just move on." Frank nodded. "Mac's right. This isn't about you. It's about what kind of town we want to be." Outside, they watched another regular drive past the shop without stopping, eyes averted. The message was clear. People saw Lara as a risk, not a neighbor. Tommy's campaign was working. Later that morning, as the sun rose over the Texas sky, Lara returned to the shop, coffee in hand. She pulled into the lot and froze. Something was off. The building looked wrong in the morning light. Then she saw why. Graffiti covered every surface, garage doors, windows, even the walls. Words meant to tear her down screamed back at her: cripple, fake hero, broken soldier. Crude stick figures, missing limbs, defaced military logos, distorted wheelchair signs, each part of it tailored to humiliate. Her award's Purple Heart, bronze star, had been painted over and slashed in red. The Marine Corps' emblem flipped upside down, buried under slurs. Lara sat motionless in her truck, the engine cooling as she absorbed the full scale of the attack. This wasn't random vandalism. This was a coordinated, personal strike against her identity and her place in this community. Frank's truck pulled in behind hers moments later. He took in the destruction with clenched fists and burning eyes, watching not just a building defaced, but a piece of his life desecrated. 30 years, he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that had nothing to do with volume. 30 years building this reputation, this business, and they think they can destroy it in one night. Other vehicles began arriving as word spread. Through the small community's morning routines, Elena Murphy's battered sedan pulled up first, followed by Mac's dusty pickup. Then came Deputy Rosa Valdez in her patrol car, her face grim with the professional anger of someone who'd sworn to protect and serve. But it was the reaction of the gathering crowd that truly revealed the depth of Tommy Kowalski's calculation. Some faces showed outrage and sympathy, Elena wiping tears from her eyes as she took in the scope of the attack. Mac's military bearing radiating controlled violence as he assessed the tactical implications. But others showed something different: fear, uncertainty, the kind of hesitation that suggested maybe, just maybe, Lara Poole wasn't worth this kind of trouble. Billy Murphy arrived on his bicycle, his teenage face cycling through confusion, understanding, and rage in rapid succession. Who would do this? He demanded, his voice cracking with emotion. This is sick. This is what happens when good people do nothing. Elena cut him off, her maternal instinct sharpening into something that looked like controlled fury. And it stops now. Rosa began documenting the scene with methodical professionalism, but her radio crackled with other demands: a domestic dispute across town, a traffic accident on the highway. The reality of small-town law enforcement meant she couldn't stay to investigate as thoroughly as the crime deserved. I'll file the report, she assured Frank and Lara. But realistically, this is going to be hard to prosecute without witnesses or physical evidence linking specific individuals to the crime. We know who did this, Mac said quietly, his voice carrying the certainty of someone who'd learned to read enemy tactics across multiple deployments. Knowing and proving are different things. Rosa replied with the frustrated pragmatism of a cop who'd worked these cases before. The road wolves are careful about maintaining distance from their intimidation campaigns. As the morning progressed, the true scope of Tommy's strategy became clear. Word of the vandalism spread through the small community's gossip networks, and by noon, Frank had received 3 calls from regular customers canceling service appointments. Mrs. Henderson called to quietly ask if her transmission work was complete, and if she could pick up her truck after business hours, when no one would see her. The financial pressure was immediate and obvious. Rodriguez Auto Repair survived on reputation and word of mouth in a community where everyone knew everyone. Association with controversy, even unjust controversy, was a luxury that small businesses couldn't afford. Maybe I should take some time off, Lara suggested as she and Frank worked to clean the worst of the graffiti from the bay doors. Let things cool down. No. Frank's voice carried the absolute finality of someone who'd made a decision that went beyond business considerations. You take time off. Tommy Kowalski wins. He gets to decide who works in this town, who deserves respect, who gets to rebuild their life after serving their country. Elena had organized a small group of volunteers to help with the cleanup, mostly older residents who remembered when community meant standing together against outside threats. Mrs. Catherine Cat Washington arrived with industrial-strength cleaner and a tongue sharp enough to cut glass. 60 years I've lived in this town, Cat announced to anyone within hearing distance, and I've never seen such cowardice disguised as reasonable caution. That girl earned her place here with blood and sacrifice, and anyone who thinks otherwise can answer to me. But even as the volunteers worked to erase the physical evidence of the attack, the psychological damage was spreading. Lara could see it in the careful way people avoided eye contact, the whispered conversations that stopped when she approached, the subtle but unmistakable message that her presence was becoming a liability the community couldn't afford. The breaking point came when Marcus "Hammer" Johnson appeared at the edge of the parking lot, standing beside his motorcycle with the uncertain posture of someone wrestling with conscience. His road wolves patch was clearly visible, but so was the discomfort in his stance. The way his eyes kept moving between the vandalized building and Lara's face. For a moment, it looked like he might approach, might break the silence that had protected his club's plausible deniability. But then another motorcycle appeared on the horizon. Tommy, Kowalski himself, arriving to survey the fruits of his night's work. Marcus's moment of potential courage evaporated. He climbed back on his bike and roared away, leaving behind only the echo of what might have been and the bitter certainty that the next escalation was already being planned. Tommy stopped his motorcycle just outside the property line, close enough to see the cleanup efforts, but maintaining legal distance from the crime scene. His smile was visible even from across the street, the satisfied expression of someone watching his strategy unfold exactly as planned. The message was clear. This was only the beginning. The knock on Deputy Rosa Valdez's office door came at 6:30 p.m. on a Thursday, 3 days after the vandalism at Rodriguez Auto Repair. Marcus "Hammer" Johnson stood in the doorway with his road wolves colors draped over his arm and a manila envelope clutched in weathered hands that shook slightly. Despite his obvious effort at control, "Deputy," Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of a decision that had cost him everything he thought he valued. "I need to report a crime." Rosa looked up from her paperwork, taking in the man's obvious distress and the significance of the motorcycle club vest he was holding rather than wearing. 20 years of law enforcement had taught her to recognize the moment when someone's conscience finally overcame their loyalty. And Marcus Johnson had the look of a man who'd reached his breaking point. "Have a seat, Marcus," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "Tell me what's on your mind." Marcus sat heavily, the envelope balanced on his knees like a weight he could barely carry. It was Tommy. The vandalism at Frank's place. I was there. The admission hung in the air between them, carrying implications that would ripple through the small community for months to come. Rosa activated her digital recorder and read Marcus's rights, then settled back to listen as a man unburdened himself of secrets that had been eating him alive. "It started as just harassment," Marcus began, his voice steadying as he found his rhythm. "Tommy's been fixated on that Marine Lara since the night at Murphy's. Said she needed to learn her place, that veterans like her gave real warriors a bad name. Veterans like her." Rosa's voice carried careful neutrality, though her own military background made the phrase sting. "Disabled veterans. Women who claim to be heroes." Marcus's face showed disgust at his own words. "Tommy's got issues with anyone who served when he couldn't. Asthma kept him out, and he's never gotten over it." The envelope contained photographs, images taken with Marcus's phone during the vandalism, showing Tommy and two other road wolves spray painting their hatred across Frank's business. The pictures were clear enough to identify faces, detailed enough to establish premeditation and scope of the damage. "Why now?" Rosa asked as she examined the evidence. "Why come forward after 3 days?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his hands working the brim of an invisible hat. "My daughter's 28, same age as Lara. She's been asking about the club, about what we stand for." His voice broke slightly. "How do I explain to her that Daddy helped destroy a war hero's life because our leaders got a small dick and a big ego?" The investigation moved quickly once Rosa had Marcus's cooperation. Phone records showed coordination between Tommy and other club members. Security footage from a gas station down the highway captured the road wolves purchasing spray paint. At 2 a.m., most damning of all, Tommy had been stupid enough to brag about the attack to other club members, not realizing that his authority was already fracturing. By Friday morning, Rosa had 3 more road wolves willing to testify against their former leader. The brotherhood that Tommy had built through intimidation and shared criminality was crumbling as members faced the choice between loyalty and prison time. The arrest happened at the Road Wolves Clubhouse, a converted garage on the outskirts of town that had served as their headquarters for 5 years. Tommy fought the handcuffs with the desperate fury of someone watching his entire identity collapse, screaming threats about lawyers and revenge while Rosa read him his rights with professional calm. "This ain't over," Tommy shouted as Rosa guided him into the patrol car. "You think you've won something, but this is just the beginning." But even as he made his threats, Tommy could see the evidence of his defeat. Half his club had already abandoned their colors, while the other half watched his arrest with the calculating eyes of men deciding whether their leader was worth following into legal jeopardy. The news spread through the small community with the speed that only genuine justice could generate. Frank called Lara at her apartment above the hardware store, his voice tight with satisfaction as he delivered the update. Mac drove straight to the sheriff's office to offer whatever support Rosa might need for the prosecution. At Murphy's Diner, Elena served coffee with tears of relief streaming down her cheeks, while Billy peppered anyone who would listen with questions about what charges Tommy would face and how long he might serve. Even Mrs. Henderson called Frank to quietly ask if she could reschedule her truck's oil change. But the real measure of change came when Lara arrived at the garage Monday morning to find a line of vehicles waiting for service, not just the return of old customers, but new ones. Word had spread beyond the immediate community about what had happened, and it seemed that standing up to bullies had generated a kind of respect that normal advertising couldn't buy. "Funny thing about bullies," Frank observed as they surveyed the busy lot. "Most people hate them, but it takes seeing one get taken down before they remember they outnumber him." Dr. Patricia Brown called Lara that afternoon to schedule an emergency session, concerned about how the stress of the past week might be affecting her PTSD symptoms. But when Lara arrived at the VA clinic, she found something unexpected in her therapist's expression, pride mixed with professional concern. "How are you processing all this?" Patricia asked as they settled into the familiar routine of therapy. "Better than I expected," Lara admitted. "For the first time since I got back, I feel like I belong somewhere, like I'm not just hiding from who I used to be." And Tommy Kowalski, "How do you feel about pressing charges?" Lara considered the question carefully, scared, angry, but also relieved. Someone finally has to face consequences for thinking disabled veterans are acceptable targets. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following month, with charges including criminal mischief, harassment, and intimidation of a witness. Tommy's lawyer, a public defender who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, had already reached out about a plea bargain. But as Rosa explained the legal process to Lara and Mac over coffee at Murphy's Diner, she also delivered a warning. "Tommy's looking at real jail time if this goes to trial. That makes him dangerous in ways we haven't seen yet. Desperate men do desperate things." Outside, the Texas highway stretched toward distant horizons, carrying travelers toward destinations unknown. But for the first time since arriving in this small town, Lara felt like she might actually want to see what came next. The Road Wolves were finished, their leader facing justice, and the community had proven it would stand up for what was right. The only question was whether Tommy Kowalski would accept defeat, or if his desperation would demand one final, devastating escalation. 6 months after Tommy Kowalski's conviction, on charges of criminal mischief, harassment, and intimidation, the small Texas town had settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal. The Road Wolves had disbanded completely, their clubhouse converted into a legitimate motorcycle repair shop, run by Marcus Johnson, who'd traded his colors for coveralls and a business license. Tommy himself was serving 18 months in state prison, his appeals exhausted and his former followers scattered to other towns and other clubs. Lara stood in the bay of Rodriguez Auto Repair, her hands deep in the engine compartment of a 1987 Chevy pickup that belonged to a rancher from 3 counties over. Word had spread about the quality of work coming out of Frank's shop, and more importantly, about the Marine veteran who could diagnose engine problems that had stumped mechanics. With twice her experience, the business was thriving in ways that Frank had never imagined. with a waiting list that stretched to weeks out and customers willing to drive hours. For Lara's expertise, "That's some beautiful work," Mac said from behind her, his voice carrying the warmth of someone who'd found unexpected purpose in a place he'd never planned to call home. Lara looked up from the carburetor she was rebuilding, wiping grease from her hands with the kind of satisfied smile that had become more frequent over the past months. "Mrs. Patterson's been nursing this truck for 20 years. Figured it deserved to run like new again." Mac had made his decision to stay permanent 3 months earlier, purchasing a small house on the edge of town and officially establishing residency. His cross-country journey to visit Gold Star families had evolved into something different, a program working with Dr. Patricia Brown to provide peer support for veterans transitioning to civilian life. The VA had approved funding for a pilot program, and Mac found himself counseling young men and women who reminded him daily of both his son and the warrior Lara had been. "Speaking of running like new," Mac said, settling into the folding chair Frank kept near Lara's workstation for the frequent visitors who came to watch her work. "Dr. Brown wanted me to ask if you're still planning to speak at next week's veteran outreach event." The VA clinic had been hosting monthly gatherings for local veterans, providing a space for informal peer support that complemented the formal therapy programs Lara had been attending for months, initially as a reluctant participant, but gradually becoming one of the group's most trusted voices. Her willingness to discuss the realities of disability and PTSD with unflinching honesty had helped other veterans process their own struggles. "I'll be there," Lara confirmed, though she still felt nervous about public speaking. "Billy's been helping me practice the presentation." Billy Murphy had become an unexpected ally in Lara's journey toward community integration. Now 19, and delayed a year in his military enlistment plans, he'd thrown himself into veteran advocacy with the passionate intensity of someone who'd seen injustice up close and personal. His grandmother Elena had channeled that energy into productive directions, making him Lara's unofficial assistant for community outreach efforts. The bell above the front door chimed, and Elena's voice carried back to the work bay. "Lara, honey, you've got a visitor." Lara emerged from beneath the truck's hood to find a young woman standing near the front counter, her military bearing obvious despite civilian clothes that hung loose on a too-thin frame. She couldn't have been more than 22, with short brown hair and eyes that held the particular kind of exhaustion that came from fighting battles both foreign and domestic. "Ma'am," the young woman said, her voice carrying the formal precision of recent military service, "I'm looking for Lara Poole. I heard she might be able to help." Frank gestured toward Lara with a proud smile that had become his default expression when introducing his star mechanic. "This is Lara, and you are Corporal Sarah Mitchell, ma'am. Recently discharged from the Army." Sarah's stance was parade ground perfect, but Lara could see the tremor in her hands, the way her eyes swept the garage's exits with the hypervigilance of someone still processing trauma. "Just Lara," she corrected gently, recognizing something familiar in the young woman's carefully controlled composure. "What can I do for you, Sarah? I heard about what happened here, about how the community stood up for you." Sarah's voice wavered slightly, revealing the vulnerability beneath her military bearing. "I'm having some trouble adjusting, and the VA caseworker in Austin said you might be someone who could understand." Mac had moved closer, his paternal instincts activated by the obvious distress radiating from the young veteran. "What branch?" "Corporal, Army, sir, 15th Infantry. Did the tours in Syria before." Sarah's voice trailed off, her hand moving unconsciously to her left arm, where Lara noticed the bulge of a prosthetic beneath her loose sleeve. Lara asked quietly. Sarah nodded, tears gathering in her eyes despite her obvious effort at control. "Lost my arm from the elbow down. They're telling me I'm lucky, that prosthetic technology is amazing now, that I can do anything I set my mind to. But nobody wants to hire a one-armed mechanic, and I can't afford the apartment I'm renting. And everyone keeps looking at me like I'm broken." The words hit Lara like physical blows, each one an echo of her own journey through the wilderness. A veteran transition. She could see her past self in Sarah's desperate composure, the way the young woman held herself together through sheer force of will, while everything around her threatened to collapse. "Let's go get some coffee," Lara said, making a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. "There's a diner down the road where the owner makes it a point to feed hungry veterans." Murphy's Diner at 3 in the afternoon was nearly empty, with only a few truckers nursing coffee at the counter and Elena working on inventory in the back office. Lara led Sarah to the same corner booth where she'd faced her own moment of truth 6 months earlier. The same place where Mac had first offered her the recognition that had started her healing process. "This is where it happened," Lara said, as they settled into the red vinyl seats. "Where I learned the difference between being broken and being wounded." Elena appeared with coffee and pie without being asked, her maternal instincts immediately recognizing another young veteran in need of feeding. "On the house, honey," she told Sarah with the same gentle firmness she'd shown Lara. "And if you need a place to stay while you're getting on your feet, Billy's old room upstairs is empty." Sarah's composure finally cracked, tears streaming down her face as she realized she'd stumbled into the kind of community support she'd been desperately seeking. "I don't understand. You don't even know me." "I know enough," Elena replied simply. "You serve your country, you're having a hard time, and you found your way to us. That's all I need to know." Over the next 2 hours, Lara found herself doing something she'd never expected, becoming the mentor she'd once needed. She talked Sarah through the practical realities of prosthetic adjustment, the bureaucratic maze of VA disability benefits, the psychological journey of rebuilding identity after traumatic injury. "The hardest part," Lara explained as they walked back toward the garage, "isn't learning to use the prosthetic. It's learning to see yourself as whole again when everyone else sees you as damaged." "How did you do it?" Lara gestured toward the busy garage, where Frank was explaining a repair estimate to a customer while Mac organized paperwork with the efficiency of someone who'd found new purpose. "I stopped trying to do it alone. Started letting people help, even when accepting help felt like admitting defeat." Frank looked up as they entered, taking in Sarah's tear-streaked face and Lara's protective posture with the quick assessment of someone who'd learned to read people. Through decades of customer service and military experience, Sarah's looking for work, Lara announced. "She's got automotive training from the Army, and I could use an assistant." Frank's response was immediate and practical. "Can you start Monday? We're booked solid through the end of the month, and Lara's been working 60-hour weeks trying to keep up. But my prosthetic," Sarah began, "can probably hold tools better than my arthritis can." Frank cut her off with a grin. "Military training, good work ethic, and Lara's willing to vouch for you. That's all the qualification I need." Mac stepped forward with the same envelope of photographs he'd carried 6 months earlier, now supplemented with contact information for the veteran support network he'd helped build. "There's a group that meets every Tuesday evening at the community center. Veterans helping veterans process the transition. Lara's been one of our most valuable contributors." As the afternoon sun slanted through the garage's windows, painting everything in golden light, Lara felt something she hadn't experienced since before the IED explosion: completeness. Not the physical wholeness she'd lost, but something deeper, the satisfaction of purpose that came from using her wounds to help others heal. Dr. Patricia Brown arrived just as they were closing up, drawn by a phone call from Mac about their newest addition to the community. Her professional assessment of Sarah was quick but thorough, and she scheduled an intake appointment for the following week. "You know," Patricia said to Lara as they watched Sarah drive away in a battered Honda, "that would probably need attention soon. 6 months ago, you could barely accept help from others. Now you're offering it to strangers." "She's not a stranger," Lara replied. "She's a Marine who lost her way, same as I was." "Is that how you see yourself now?" "A Marine who lost her way." Lara considered the question as she locked up her toolbox, the same red metal container that had been vandalized with hate and was now covered with stickers from satisfied customers and military unique patches from veterans who'd found their way to Frank's garage. "No," she said finally. "I'm a Marine who found her way home." Elena had stayed late to prepare dinner for the impromptu gathering that had developed Mac, Billy, Frank, and now Lara and Sarah sharing a meal around the diner's largest table. The conversation flowed with the easy familiarity of people who'd chosen to become family, punctuated by laughter and the kind of storytelling that built bonds stronger than blood. 2 second chances. Mac raised his coffee cup in a toast that encompassed more than just Sarah's rival. To community, Elena added, her voice thick with emotion as she looked around the table at the family she'd helped create. 2 Marines who don't quit, Billy chimed in, his hero worship of Lara undimmed by months of familiarity. To home, Lara said quietly, the word carrying weight she'd never expected it to hold again. Outside, the Texas highway stretched toward distant horizons, carrying new travelers toward destinations unknown. But inside Murphy's diner, surrounded by people who'd chosen to see strength instead of damage, Lara finally understood that some journeys ended not with arrival at a predetermined destination, but with the recognition that you'd been home all along. The work of healing would continue, her own and others, but now it felt like a shared mission, rather than a solitary struggle. And tomorrow, she'd teach a young veteran that being wounded wasn't the same as being broken, just as someone had once taught her. 1 year after that first night at Murphy's diner, Lara Poole stood before the bathroom mirror in her apartment above the hardware store, adjusting the collar of her dress blue uniform. The fabric felt foreign after months of work clothes and civilian attire, but the weight of the ribbons on her chest carried a familiarity that time and trauma couldn't erase. Today marked the anniversary of Mac's intervention, and the town had declared it Veterans Recognition Day, an annual celebration that had grown from Elena's simple idea into something that drew visitors from 3 counties. The Purple Heart and Bronze Star caught the morning light streaming through her window, their colors as vibrant as the day they'd been pinned to her chest in a field hospital in Afghanistan. But now they represented something more than military service. They were symbols of a journey that had led her from isolation to community, from survival to purpose. A knock at her door interrupted her preparations. Mac stood in the hallway, his own dress uniform pressed to perfection despite his retirement. At 63, he carried himself with the same dignity that had first marked him as military. But there was something lighter in his bearing now, a sense of peace that had replaced the grief-driven urgency of his cross-country journey. Ready for your speech, Sergeant? Mac asked, using her rank with the kind of respect that had once been foreign to her civilian life. As ready as I'll ever be, Lara replied, though butterflies danced in her stomach at the thought of addressing the crowd gathering in the town square. Public speaking still challenged her, but Dr. Patricia Brown had helped her understand that sharing her story was another form of service. They walked together down Main Street toward the makeshift stage Elena and Billy had constructed in front of the diner. The entire town seemed to have turned out for the celebration, along with veterans from surrounding communities who'd driven hours to participate in something that had become larger than anyone had anticipated. Sarah Mitchell waved from her position near the stage, her prosthetic arm clearly visible in the sleeveless uniform blouse she wore with obvious pride. 6 months of work at Rodriguez Auto Repair had transformed her from the desperate young woman who'd arrived seeking help into a confident mechanic who'd earned Frank's complete trust. More importantly, she'd become Lara's partner in the informal veteran support network that had grown around Murphy's diner. Nervous? Sarah asked as Lara approached. Terrified, Lara admitted, but good terrified, the kind that means something matters. Marcus Johnson stood near the edge of the crowd, his presence a testament to the possibility of redemption. His legitimate motorcycle repair business was thriving, and he'd become an unexpected advocate for veteran services. The former road wolf had traded his colors for a simple patch that read Desert Storm Veteran, and his testimony at Tommy Kowalski's trial had helped ensure justice was served. Deputy Rosa Valdez worked the crowd in her dress uniform, the same professional competence that had investigated the vandalism, now focused on ensuring the celebration proceeded safely. She'd been promoted to sheriff the previous month, her handling of the Road Wolves situation having impressed county leadership enough to fast-track her advancement. Elena emerged from the diner carrying a tray of coffee for the speakers, her face glowing with the satisfaction of someone who'd watched her community choose courage over comfort. Billy followed behind her, now 20 and scheduled to leave for basic training in 3 weeks. His delayed enlistment had given him time to mature, to understand that military service was about more than adventure and glory. "You've got this, Lara," Elena said, setting down the coffee tray and enveloping her in the kind of maternal hug that had become routine over the past year. "Just speak from the heart." Dr. Patricia Brown approached with a young man Lara didn't recognize, early 20s, with the hollow-eyed look of someone recently returned from deployment. His left leg ended at the knee, and he navigated with crutches while obviously adjusting to a prosthetic that was clearly new. "Lara," Patricia said, "I'd like you to meet Corporal David Chen. He's been asking about the program here, about how we help veterans transition." David's eyes moved between Lara's uniform and her prosthetic leg with the kind of desperate hope she remembered feeling when she'd first heard there were others who'd made the journey from wounded to whole. "Ma'am, I heard about what you've built here, about how this town supports veterans." "It's not what I built," Lara corrected gently. "It's what we built together. Community isn't a one-person project." The conversation was interrupted by feedback from the microphone. As Billy tested the sound system, the crowd began gathering around the small stage, their faces showing the kind of genuine interest that couldn't be manufactured or forced. Frank Rodriguez took the microphone first, his weathered hands steady despite the emotion in his voice. "A year ago, this town faced a choice. We could stand by and watch a veteran be driven away by bullies, or we could decide what kind of community we wanted to be." His words carried across the crowd, reaching not just the locals who'd lived through the events, but the visiting veterans who'd come to see what made this small Texas town special. "We chose to stand up, not just for Lara Poole, but for the idea that service matters, that sacrifice deserves respect, that being wounded doesn't make you broken." Max spoke next, his natural authority commanding attention as he shared his own journey from grief to purpose. "I came here to visit one Gold Star family, and I found something I didn't expect: a community that understood what I'd lost and helped me find new meaning." He gestured toward the crowd, picking out familiar faces: Marcus Johnson, who chose conscience over loyalty; Elena Murphy, who feeds anyone who needs feeding; Dr. Patricia Brown, who helps us process what war takes from us; and Sarah Mitchell, who proves every day that our newest veterans can find the same healing we've discovered. When Mac introduced her, Lara approached the microphone with hands that trembled slightly, but a voice that grew stronger. With each word, she'd rehearsed this speech dozens of times, but standing before the crowd, she found herself speaking from something deeper than preparation. "A year ago, I thought healing meant hiding," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the square. "I came here to disappear, to avoid the looks and the questions and the pity that followed me everywhere. I went." She could see David Chen in the crowd, his expression intense with the kind of attention that came from hearing your own story reflected in someone else's words. Sarah stood near the stage, her presence a reminder of how far both of them had traveled. "I learned that healing isn't about forgetting what happened to you. It's about deciding what you do with what you've survived." Lara's eyes found Mac in the crowd, remembering the moment when his recognition had started her journey back to herself. "It's about accepting help when it's offered, and offering help when someone else needs it." She told them about the night Tommy Kowalski and his crew had tried to break her spirit, about Mac's intervention and the community's response. But more importantly, she talked about what came after, the slow work of rebuilding trust, the gradual acceptance that she deserved respect and belonging. "Veterans don't need pity," Lara continued, her voice gaining strength as she reached the heart of her message. "We need opportunity. We need community. We need to know that our service mattered, that our sacrifices weren't wasted, that we can still contribute something meaningful to the world." She gestured toward Sarah, then toward David Chen, then toward the other veterans scattered throughout the crowd. The young Marine standing over there lost her arm serving in Syria, but she's also one of the best mechanics I've ever worked with. The soldier on crutches is adjusting to a prosthetic, but he's also someone who carried wounded comrades to safety under fire. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word as Lara shared the lesson that had taken her a year to fully understand. We are not defined by what we've lost. We are defined by what we choose to do with what we have left." She paused, looking out at faces that had become family, at a community that had chosen to see strength instead of damage. This town taught me that home isn't the place you come from. It's the place where people see who you really are and decide you're worth keeping. When she stepped away from the microphone, the applause was thunderous, but more importantly, she could see the impact of her words in David Chen's eyes, in the tears streaming down Sarah's face, in the proud smiles of people who'd chosen to be part of something bigger than themselves. After the ceremony, as the crowd began to disperse toward Murphy's diner for the community barbecue Elena had organized, David Chen approached with the hesitant hope of someone taking the first step toward healing. "Ma'am," he said, "I was wondering, is there really room here for another veteran trying to figure things out?" Lara looked around at the community that had embraced her, at Mac organizing cleanup with military efficiency, at Sarah helping elderly veterans navigate the uneven ground, at Elena directing traffic toward the diner with maternal authority. "David," she said, using his first name deliberately, "there's always room for one more. That's what community means. It grows to include whoever needs it." As they walked toward Murphy's diner together, Lara felt the weight of responsibility that came with being someone others looked to for guidance. But it was a good weight, the kind that gave shape and purpose to existence. She'd become what Mac had been for her, a bridge between broken and whole, between isolation and belonging. The late afternoon sun painted Main Street in golden light as the community gathered to celebrate not just Veterans Recognition Day, but the ongoing work of healing that happened one conversation, one connection, one act of courage at a time. Inside the diner, Mac was already showing David Chen the wall where Elena displayed photos of local veterans, a growing gallery that now included images from multiple conflicts and generations. Sarah was explaining engine repair techniques to Billy, who hung on every word despite his impending departure for basic training. And at the center of it all, Elena Murphy served food with the same maternal efficiency that had first welcomed Lara a year ago, proving that some forms of service never end. They just find new expressions. Lara took her place at the table that had become headquarters for their informal veteran support network, surrounded by people who'd chosen to see her as whole rather than broken. Tomorrow, she'd teach David Chen about prosthetic adjustment and VA bureaucracy. Next week, she'd help another veteran find housing or employment, or just someone who understood. The work of healing would continue, one veteran at a time, one community, decision at a time, one choice to see strength instead of damage at a time. And every morning, she'd wake up in a place where she belonged, surrounded by people who'd chosen to become family, ready to prove again that being wounded and being broken were two entirely different things. Outside, the Texas highway stretched toward distant horizons, carrying new travelers toward destinations unknown. But inside Murphy's diner, Lara Poole had found something worth more than any destination. She'd found home. 5 years after Mackenzie first stood up in Murphy's diner, the small Texas town had become something unprecedented, a destination. The Veterans Transition Center that had grown from informal coffee meetings now occupied a converted warehouse on Main Street, funded by a combination of VA grants, private donations, and the surprising success of what locals had started calling the Murphy model. Lara stood in the center's main workshop, watching David Chen demonstrate prosthetic maintenance to a group of newly discharged veterans. What had started as one wounded Marine helping another had evolved into a comprehensive program that drew participants from across the Southwest. David now served as the center's peer counselor coordinator, his own journey from desperation to purpose, inspiring others to believe in the possibility of healing. The key, David was explaining to a young Air Force veteran adjusting to bilateral amputations, isn't learning to live with what you've lost. It's discovering what you can build with what remains. The workshop hummed with activity veterans learning automotive repair, computer programming, small business management. Sarah Mitchell ran the automotive program from a state-of-the-art facility that had attracted contracts with major dealerships. Frank Rodriguez served as business mentor, his own success story proof that supporting veterans was good for the bottom line. Mac appeared at Lara's shoulder, his hair now completely silver but his bearing as strong as ever. At 68, he'd become something of a legend in veteran advocacy circles, his Murphy model being studied and replicated in communities across the country. The Department of Veterans Affairs wants to make this a national pilot program, he said, holding up an official letter that bore impressive federal seals. Full funding, expansion to 10 sites nationwide. They want you to head the implementation team. Lara studied the letter, feeling the weight of opportunity and responsibility. The program would mean travel, bureaucracy, politics, everything she'd once fled to this small town to avoid. But it would also mean helping thousands of veterans find what she'd found here. What do you think? Mac asked. Before Lara could answer, Elena Murphy's voice called from the center's entrance. Lara, honey, you've got visitors. A van had pulled up outside, disgorging a group of wounded veterans on a tour organized by a non-profit in Dallas. Among them was a young woman in a wheelchair, her Marine Corps t-shirt worn with obvious pride despite the uncertainty in her eyes. Excuse me, the young woman said as the group approached. I'm looking for Sergeant Lara Poole. I heard she might be able to help. Lara smiled, hearing echoes of her own desperate rival years ago. Just Lara, she corrected gently, and yes, I think we can help, as she led the group into the center, past the walls lined with success stories and photos of veterans who'd rebuilt their lives. Lara realized she already had her answer about the national program. The Murphy model worked because it was about more than programs and funding. It was about people choosing to see strength instead of damage, community instead of isolation, possibility instead of limitation, and that was a message worth spreading. Some roads led away from home, others led others home to you. Lara had finally learned the difference. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Veterans Transition Center as Lara made her final walkthrough before the dedication ceremony. What had begun as a single converted warehouse now sprawled across 3 buildings, connected by covered walkways lined with memorial gardens where veterans could find quiet moments of reflection. The original Murphy's Diner still anchored the complex, though Elena had long since handed daily operations to Billy, who'd returned from his own military service with a Bronze Star and a determination to continue his grandmother's legacy of feeding anyone who needed it. The red vinyl booths remained unchanged, a deliberate preservation of the place where healing had first taken root. Nervous? Dr. Patricia Brown asked, joining Lara near the memorial wall where Tommy Kowalski's name appeared alongside the hundreds of other veterans the program had served. Even he had found redemption here, released early for good behavior and completing the center's substance abuse program before relocating to start fresh in another state. Excited, Lara corrected, watching through the windows as delegates from the Department of Veterans Affairs set up for the ceremony that would officially designate their facility as the flagship site for national expansion. 10 years ago, I came here to hide. Today, we're showing the country what's possible when communities choose courage. The delegation included senators, VA administrators, and representatives from the 12 additional sites that had successfully implemented the Murphy model, but more importantly, it included nearly 200 veterans whose lives had been transformed by what had started as one retired colonel's refusal to let cruelty go unchallenged. Sarah Mitchell emerged from the automotive bay, her business having grown to employ 37 people, 26 of them veterans. Her prosthetic arm was barely noticeable now, integrated so seamlessly into her movement that new employees often worked with her for weeks before realizing she was an amputee. The delegation from Phoenix just arrived, Sarah reported. Their program director wants to discuss expanding the automotive training to include electric vehicle technology. Mac appeared from the administrative offices, moving with the careful dignity of someone whose body was finally acknowledging its 73 years. His son David's photograph hung prominently in the center's main lobby, surrounded by images of all the veterans whose sacrifices had made this moment possible. The senator's ready for your introduction, Mac said, his voice still carrying the authority that had once commanded battalions. She's particularly interested in the employment statistics 92% job placement rate for program graduates, As they made their way toward the ceremony site, Lara reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The Murphy model had been replicated in communities from rural Alaska to urban Detroit, each site adapting the core principles to local needs while maintaining the essential truth that healing happened through connection, purpose, and mutual support. The crowd gathering in the center's main courtyard represented more than just program participants and government officials. Families who'd driven hundreds of miles to witness their loved ones graduate from various programs, mixed with local business owners who'd discovered that hiring veterans wasn't just good citizenship, it was good business. Elena Murphy, now 83 and moving slowly, but with undiminished determination, took her place at the podium with the kind of natural authority that came from decades of nurturing others. Her introduction was characteristically brief and direct. 10 years ago, a wounded Marine came to my diner looking for a quiet place to eat, Elena began, her voice carrying easily across the silent crowd. She found something better. She found home, and in finding home, she helped the rest of us remember what community really means. When Lara stepped to the microphone, she looked out at faces that told the story of what was possible when people chose to see potential instead of problems. David Chen sat with his wife and twin daughters, his prosthetic leg a source of pride rather than shame. Marcus Johnson worked the crowd in his capacity as the center's security coordinator, his transformation from road wolf to respected community member complete. The Murphy model isn't really about veterans, Lara began, her words causing surprised murmurs among the government officials who'd come expecting a different message. It's about what happens when ordinary people decide that everyone deserves a chance to contribute, to belong, to matter. She gestured toward the buildings around them, toward the gardens where veterans found peace, toward the workshops where broken people discovered they could still build beautiful things. We measure our success not just in employment rates or housing placements, but in restored dignity, renewed purpose, and the kind of belonging that transforms survival into life worth living. As applause echoed across the courtyard, Lara felt the presence of everyone who'd made this moment possible. Mac's courage, Elena's nurturing, Frank's practical support, Sarah's determination, and the hundreds of veterans who'd chosen to see their wounds as sources of strength rather than symbols of limitation. The ceremony concluded with the traditional reading of names not of the fallen, but of the found. Each graduate who'd rebuilt their life, each family reunited with purpose, each community member who'd chosen inclusion over isolation, standing in the Texas sun, surrounded by the family she'd chosen and who'd chosen her. Lara understood that some victories weren't measured in medals or recognition, but in the quiet daily choices that proved broken things could be made beautiful. Again, the road that had brought her here continued forward, carrying new travelers toward healing they couldn't yet imagine, and she would be there to meet them. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.